I'd like to start off this morning with a panel from some of the most incredible thought leaders in the space of impact in the process of storytelling and production. And so I'd like to introduce them to you, but first I'll introduce myself. My name is Heather Phipps. I am currently the program manager at the Redford Center, and I'm also one of the executive producers of the Hollywood Climate Summit. I am wearing a black shirt. I have reddish brown hair, and I have a beautiful plant behind me, as well as a photo that I love, a piece of artwork. And now I would like to introduce you to my panel. I'll start with Rue.
Sure. Thanks. My name is Rue Mahoney, and I'm an impact producer at ProjectImpact. And I'm a mostly Caucasian woman with long dark hair, wearing an orange sweater today, and looking a little sleep deprived because I recently had a child. So really excited to be here with you all.
I think it naturally follows. I work with Rue. My name's James Fulcher. I head up operations at ProjectImpact. I'm a Caucasian male with short brown hair in a red brick building, and I could have done with a shave. So essentially I head up the operations side of ProjectImpact. I'm based over in London. I'll pass to Chloe.
Hey, I'm Chloe. I'm a showrunner at Wildstar Films in the UK. I have blonde curly hair. I'm white Caucasian. I'm currently hiding in my bedroom from my teenage stepdaughters. So if you hear any background kerfuffle, that is what is going on.
And hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Orlowski. I'm a filmmaker and director, and I founded the organization Exposure Labs several years ago, many years ago. I don't even know at this point. I am an Asian American male, 37 years old, long black hair tied back in, I guess I should call this a man bun. And I'm wearing my favorite glasses that are wooden frames, which are, I think, just are cool and fun. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. So I would love to start the conversation off with the prompting question. What is your approach to impact in both storytelling, but also in your research and practice? So the reason why I'd like to have this conversation with each of you is that impact is a term that is used in many different contexts these days. And as a professor of media and social impact, I've followed each of your work, and I feel that you have very incredible approaches to how you incorporate impact into your work. And I really feel that you are thought leaders in this space. So I'm very grateful for your time today to speak about that and the process that each of you approach your work. I'd like to start the conversation off with ProjectImpact, if you'd be willing to share your thought process in terms of impact development and strategy.
I'd say our approach to impact is working backwards. It's essentially knowing we want to achieve at the inception of a project, and then trying to line up everything that needs to happen to achieve that ultimate focused goal, so that we're bringing the attention that you get through broad public awareness of an issue, such as you get with a film, and making sure that we're leveraging that in the most efficient way possible to make sure that we're supporting frontline organizations and frontline conservation efforts typically. But making sure that we are harnessing as much of the energy that's built around the film as possible to make sure that when we walk away from the film and move on to the next project, we've moved the needle forwards on an issue and left assets and an audience that will be there long term to support the issue we're trying to solve. We essentially have one foot in the science side and one foot in the production side, and do everything we can to marry up the skill sets of the two to make sure we're supporting the people creating content with the knowledge and toolkits they need to do that effectively for the people that are doing the hard work long term.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think we take an incredibly nerdy approach, which works really well for our team and I find really fun. But essentially, we have a team that is comprised of production people, but also lots of communication scientists and some folks who have, PhDs in this field. And I think for us, myself coming from a background that was kind of one foot in academia and one foot in film production, I was always sort of blown away. There's this enormous kind of body of knowledge in the academic space, and you sort of get this ivory tower syndrome where where there's a huge amount of expertise and whole departments at major universities who specialize in researching exactly how to communicate your topic to very specific audiences who might actually be the audience that you're hoping your film could speak to. And what I found early in my career in production is that those academics were not speaking to the people who were actually having the most reach to public audiences, which were filmmakers and storytellers. And I think some folks have done an amazing job of trying to help close that gap. And we really wanted to kind of be part of that momentum and, helping make it easier, I think, for production companies to know what is the best science behind, how to talk about their topic, who they're targeting to, because so many times we were being approached with projects which were saying, oh, I've made this film and I hope that it speaks to this demographic of people. And then we see the film and we're like, oh, that's not going to appeal to that audience. We would have rather speak to you in the beginning. So that's the space that we largely sit in now. So we often work from pre-production as kind of consultants for narratives. And now we spend quite a lot of time running campaigns also once those productions are public facing.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm so happy to have you here to speak to the whole process. And I know that you are part of Impact throughout the whole process. And I know, Jeff, that is largely the model of exposure labs as well. I'm wondering if you could speak to your experience as a filmmaker, why you have included Impact as a part of your strategy, a part of your company, and even extended your company's offerings into offering Impact support to other filmmakers.
Thank you, Heather and James and Rue. I just loved everything that you said. I'm like +1 on all of it. And I was going to start with James, kind of your comments on the reverse engineering and the working backwards, because I do think every project and every story is so custom and they're so different and they require such unique hand-holding. It's hard to like cookie cutter copy paste like a campaign from one project to another project because the issues are different, or the audience might be different, or the message might be different. For us, it came out of my first feature, Chasing Ice. That was where so much of this came for me, where we made that film, we struggled to get it released, struggled to get it distributed, but then we saw a resounding response from the public and from audiences that were being affected and were being changed by the film and by seeing the film. And we just knew there was more we needed to do. Part of it, I think, is, we've been criticizing algorithms with the social dilemma and filter bubbles. I think that same thing happens in the world of film distribution. We were realizing that the people who saw Chasing Ice were all the same people who saw all the climate films for years and years. And it's like, that's great. And we want them to keep watching, but we also need to get to new audiences, and we need to build a base, and we need to get wider. We need to get beyond the choir. Algorithms don't do that, right? An algorithm will deepen a choir, it won't expand the choir. And I think that's one of the things that we realized early on. There was just so much opportunity and work that could be done to support the film. How do you use a film strategically? How do you find the right places and the right audiences? And I think that was the germ of the idea that really expanded to all of the work that we do as an impact team. Thinking about, as James and we were talking through, thinking about impact from the beginning. There is this weird sort of chicken and egg and back and forth, and the balance. There's a spectrum between activism and journalism that I think exists in nonfiction filmmaking, and different filmmakers land on different parts of that. And for us, I think we're wanting to go in with open eyes and explore a subject, and then we still, to some degree, come up with a thesis and a perspective at the end of it. And I think it also really differs, like I said, based on the particular subject matter and the particular story. And I think that some issues like climate are like, we know the problem now. The problem has been so well established. I don't know if we need more films on the problem. We've sort of moved beyond that for our team, but there are lots of stories that we need around the solutions and action and activism and opportunity around climate and what a better future looks like. But there are other issues that still require that problem statement to be defined in a film or in a piece of work. And so it really depends on where the interests are and where the story is. And as we all know, there are an infinite number of ways you can tell a story about any particular issue. I think more and more we need to get closer and closer, as James and Rue were talking about, the frontline workers, the frontline activists, the people who are doing the work, boots on the ground. Those stories are huge, huge opportunities for much more expansive storytelling in pretty much any issue out there. So I think that's just the intro on the headspace of where we are as a team.
Thank you so much for that. And that is a perfect segue to Chloe. The reason why I've asked you to join this conversation is because you are expanding the storytellers and you are focusing on building up communities on the front lines who are facing environmental crises, and also placing the stories in their hand and providing training opportunities. Would you be willing to share your approach to your production company's training and impact in the field?
Of course. I think I'm glad you didn't ask me to answer your initial question, because I would say, ask me again in 5 years. I have no idea. We're taking our first tentative wobbly steps into this world. But I think we're on a journey at Wildstar where we were, I was handed a wonderful commission that naturally talks about female leadership in the natural world. And so we were looking to grow the field of female filmmakers. And through that process has been such a inspiring, powerful, positive thing for us that we realized that we wanted to continue doing that work, but we needed to find a sustainable way to do it. And we quickly realized that the best way of that was out of the commissioning process, and for us as a company to take it on as we're launching an academy, so that for every show that Wildstar makes, we provide training opportunities, and we're setting up a foundation at the moment. So it's not impact around a campaign per se, but I guess it is still an outcome that we need. We realize that we need more voices, we need different voices, we need stories told from the front line in different countries, and we need them to be on different platforms. And the way that Wildstar can maybe help is to provide the training and the support to create those hubs of talent. So we are finding our way, and we are going at it slowly, but that's where we're at the moment.
Thank you so much, Chloe. I'd like to pass it over to Project Impact and ask, impact strategies and impact campaigns can look very different and can have very different creative approaches, ways of engagement. Would you be willing to share some of the current ongoings of Project Impact's campaigns and why each project requires a different approach?
So one of the most important things is to know your audience, and your audience who are actually going to see the film and their interaction with the content itself, but also how they can be part of the supporting the solutions. So what we find quite often is once we identify what needs to happen in a particular space, we might need a large number of people taking the same action, but what we do, and one of the more kind of creative approaches that we take to this, is to frame that action in very different ways for different people, and potentially offer up a number of different actions, knowing that there are actions that are suitable for people in all locations, in every financial situation, and making sure that we're leveraging each different audience in the most appropriate way for their situation. And then trying to marry that up with the right message going to the right individuals and the right audiences through the right messenger. So one of the key things that we'll do is audience mapping, and we'll really understand, okay, how can this section of the audience, based on demographic, psychographic, whatever data we have on that audience, how can they interact with the solutions? I think Jeff said it so well in terms of, this is now a communications issue. We know what we need to do to solve these problems. And I think I'll just take this opportunity to kind of say, I think as filmmakers, there is a real responsibility to use the power that we have to communicate to a large amount of people. Because if somebody turned up on a Monday morning and said, right, you've got to go save the world, one of the most difficult things to do is to get everybody's attention. That's what we have naturally through the product that we have. So there is a responsibility to make sure we're speaking to all these audiences in the right way, in the most appropriate way, and in the most inclusive way for all audiences. Now, that naturally ties up with making sure that we are offering up these solutions to audiences, and then making sure that we are building out the audiences around them as individuals. So where I'm getting with this is, if we mapped out audiences, the traditional NGO audience would be a very small segment of the actual audience of the media product itself. So what we try and do is we find the communal values around any topic that sits across all demographics, issues such as caring about family, caring about the future, not necessarily bringing in some of the strongest environmental audience kind of arguments, but making sure that we are appealing to communal values that appeal to the full breadth of the audience, to bring them into the conversation, to make it inclusive, to understand that there's different levels of literacy, and to absolutely accept that there's a multitude of different opinions, and start framing the messaging in a way that we know will work well with the audiences, and then start testing that heavily. So I think Rue's probably the best person to speak to how we reach it. We've done a lot of tech with this as well.
Yeah, so a great example of this kind of in practice right now is that we're running at the moment a campaign for a giant screen film, which was actually supposed to come out last fall. And like many things, COVID kind of put the kibosh on that, and we're trying to figure out how to pivot. And we had to very quickly kind of figure out how to creatively respond to the fact that we didn't have a film coming out. But some of the most important political decisions and opportunities surrounding that film and that were going to be central to the campaign were not delayed. And so suddenly we had lots of film assets from a giant screen film about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge here in America, and we didn't have a film to rally people around. And so we had to think really creatively about how can we still harness these media assets to try and make progress and have an impact on this issue. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up launching probably the most complex social media campaign. So it was funny when Jeff was talking about algorithms. In this case, we actually took advantage of how, I should say, exclusive social media algorithms can be. And we tried to think about the fact that we knew we couldn't change the fact that social media algorithms tend to put people in echo chambers. But what we did know we could do is curate what those echo chambers were hearing. And so what we did is we built a website that leveraged much more corporate technology than most film or even NGO websites use. And so in the same way that if I'm shopping for a pair of, a tracksuit or a pair of trainers, there are little, pixels that start following me around the internet and say like, hey, do you want to book a trip to Hawaii? I saw you looking at your flip-flops. There's that we all are inundated with that all of the time. That same technology allowed us to build a website that would, based on who you were and where you were coming from, would offer you very slightly different framing, both in terms of the narrative that you were being offered as well as the images. And again, this isn't like creepy Cambridge Analytica. This is the same thing that corporate websites who are selling you things do. However, I'll be really curious to hear Jeff's opinion, because I think James and I were always like, can we just say that this is like a white hat solution and we're not bad people for doing this? But we sort of made peace with it ourselves. And we did the same thing on social media in the way that we targeted audiences. And so we took the research kind of aspect of what we do in mapping audiences, and we said, what are the messages around preserving the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge that speak to very different types of Americans? And I think, I don't have to, it would take the rest of this call to kind of detail how politically diverse the United States is, especially when you start getting into climate communication. So we knew we had to do a great job of differentiating that message. And what we found, long story short, is just that, more progressive and liberal audiences were more responsive to messages about Indigenous rights and sovereignty issues, whereas more moderate and conservative audiences were much more responsive to messages about wildlife conservation and specifically preservation of natural spaces for future generations. They were also really responsive to messages about economic stability and national resilience and whatnot. And so what we were able to do is to take advantage of those echo chambers that exist and to say, we're going to shop the right message in front of each of these demographics. And we're going to see how successful we are in getting very different types of Americans to come over to our Take Action page, where we've made it very neutral. And like James said, we had purposely made our Take Action page a place that really spoke to those universal values, but sort of the breadcrumb trail that we laid to get you there was really different depending upon who you were. All of them were valid. We weren't making up there are serious Indigenous rights abuses happening in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There are major repercussions for economic stability in the United States and whatnot. So everything we were putting out was factual, but we were just making sure that depending upon who you were most likely to be met with the message that was going to be a hook for you. And we saw that be really successful. Before the film even came out, we had an audience online of about 15 million unique visitors from around the world come over to the website. And we were successful in getting 6.5 million people to participate in a U.S. public comment period to the U.S. government, which actually broke the record for the largest participation in a government public comment period. And they referenced those letters when they denied the permit for drilling inside the Arctic Refuge. So it was the closest that we could get to validation that it had been our impact campaign and our efforts that did it. But, and that brings up kind of probably the final thing that I'll say for these methodologies for, impact is that having an audience of that size and success prior to a film even coming out really has helped us kind of start to hone in on how I think lots of us are bought into how impact can do things from an altruistic perspective, that these projects can do good things for the world. But having that audience has now become central to the sales pitch for that giant screen film, as we're now looking to expand and to get into theaters. And when you're making decisions about what film to commission for your theater, you can either take the film that's probably going to do well, or you can take the film that has an audience of 15 million people. And so I think in this sense, the campaign has proved that not only can we do really great things for the world, we can also commercially boost the success of the film by being authentic and by doing good work.
Such a thoughtful approach to all of your work. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to now pass it to Jeff. Jeff, I'm wondering if you could speak to, as a filmmaker, your process for developing impact into your work, and then how you have improved upon that model and expanded upon that model in your company, Exposure Labs, and even implemented it so far as to have Exposure Labs provide mentorship and opportunities for professional development, including the Climate Story Lab through Exposure Labs work.
I just wanted to plus one what James and Rue were talking through there, and I really love and appreciate kind of the science-focused approach that you have to the communication work that you're doing. I think this is just a growing and growing field right now, which is really exciting to see. Of course, it's been around for a while, but I guess I have more recent exposure to it, and I think the application for filmmakers and storytellers is really huge. To your question, Heather, we've been around. I think I technically started the company in 2009, so it feels like a long time, but it has morphed and evolved over so many different years and what our goals and intentions are. I think my background and wheelhouse is in the filmmaking side, and I've always felt most comfortable just in making the projects. And then, as I said earlier, like we always felt the need to do more with it. And I think we've grown that arm of our team for quite a while over these many years now, trying to continue to invest into that thinking and to create a closed loop system around film production and impact. And one of the things that I think we're getting to now in a new and unique way is, for a long time, it was always our film production that was sort of leading the charge of here's the new story idea and then impact follows, and here's a new story idea and then impact follows. But really there's such a huge opportunity, not just as Rue was talking about around having impact involved early on, but there's huge opportunity around having impact drive what stories need to be told. What stories are we looking for? Why do we need these stories? And I think that's a very different headspace around story selection and production, that it's a different values conversation. It's a different focus on what stories and which areas need to be addressed. And so that's sort of where we are as a team right now in thinking through of the productions that we have mapped out. It's not just our production team that are discussing what projects we're considering. We have deep conversations with everybody on our impact team. We're structured right now around a climate impact team and a tech impact team. So a bunch of ongoing work around climate change, and then work specifically around the social dilemma, and that's sort of expanded out. And the way our team has evolved over time is that our climate team is no longer focused specifically on our films. We've actually migrated our work beyond supporting a campaign for an individual project, in part because, to be totally frank, like we couldn't make films on the timeline that would keep the impact team busy. It takes so long to make a movie. And then when we started making the social dilemma, it's like, well, we have this incredible team. How do we continue this energy and sustain this momentum? And one of the realizations that we had at that point was, instead of focusing on a campaign around a specific film, if we flip that model and thought about how can stories help the climate movement, how do we build greater infrastructure to support the movement at large, there's a huge opportunity for the role that film in particular, stories, but film in particular, can play within that space. So we've branched our climate work into two main programs as of right now. There are additional that we have, but the Film in the Field program is one that we've been doing, and then Climate Story Lab. Film in the Field has been this model where we flipped it and we've partnered with local grassroots organizations. In particular, SEN, the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, has been one of our main partners. So focusing on the Southeast of the United States and focusing on their network of organizations, how can we bring not just our films, but a slate of environmental movies to help advance their causes and their objectives? How can storytelling, how can community hosted events, how can those conversations for those organizations help them accomplish their mission faster? And that's really this flipped model that we see. First of all, we're decentering ourselves, but how do we then support the stories and the connections that need to happen with those groups? The second big arm of our work has been around the Climate Story Lab. So what we have learned, or whatever we've figured out, sometimes I feel it's a lot, sometimes I feel like it's nothing. How do we support and share that knowledge and bring the networks and bring the people together so that we can foster and facilitate these types of conversations for new filmmakers, or for filmmakers that are filmmakers and shouldn't be worried about impact campaigns, or maybe that's not their skill set, or maybe they need to find the right partner, or there are countless different ways based on any individual project. And I think that's been something our whole team has been very excited about. Also moving beyond the feature documentary format. So how can we elevate storytelling all across the board? Film as a hub, as a medium, but still interactive in VR and narrative films and shorts, and really building out the entire library of material that's going to keep this message moving further and faster. So that's been sort of the core objectives around Climate Story Lab, building those networks and relationships, and supporting the artists to do the most effective work that they can do. Another part that our team has been building out has been sort of this one-on-one office hours time, where people can go onto our website and sign up. And so even though we don't have a structured sort of consulting arm right now, the way we've been trying to offer that is if people have questions, they can reach out, and trying to make that a very equitable and open process for sign up with any member of our team to be able to offer thoughts on where a project's at.
Thank you. I didn't realize the complexity of my question until you gave that amazingly robust and articulate answer. Thank you. I have a question for all of you, which is, talk to me about the importance of community partnerships, working with frontline organizations, and providing resources for them throughout your process. So you're acknowledging your role as filmmakers and your impact on the movement and the communities that you're representing, that you're working with alongside. So talk to me about community partnerships. I'm sure you all have some very strong thoughts about it.
I'll be happy to jump in. Don't want to hog the mic, but if anybody, please jump in as well. For us, more and more, it is the backbone of so much of our work. In all honesty, some of our campaigns that we did in the past were very transactional. We're very like hop in, do some work, and hop out. I think there's while we've seen some degrees of success to some work like that, it's not lasting success. It's not lasting impact. I think as the whole field is sort of shifting and evolving and growing, the opportunity, but also the need for deeper partnerships and deeper long-term engagement are just becoming more and more apparent, I think, across the board. So for us, certainly with our climate work, and then growing more and more with our tech work, those relationships and those organizations, they're the ones that have been doing the work on the ground for years and years. And in some areas, for tech in particular, it's still sort of like there's a nascent field there where people are trying to figure out what are the arguments, and different partners that disagree with each other. And you come in as a filmmaker and you're like, well, where do you go, and who do you listen to, and who's got the best theory of change, and so some issues could be really challenging. Especially if it's a relatively new issue or new subject matter that's being introduced to the world. But I think that's where the long-term relationships and the long-term viability are super important. They're super valuable. And hopefully they just help you minimize some of the headaches that you would otherwise go through as well, because others have learned these mistakes already. So I'll just wrap it there, but I see a bunch of nodding heads, so I'd love for Rue or others to jump in, but it's absolutely critical. It's very much the backbone of our work moving forward.
Sure, I would. Oh, sorry. Okay, Sorry. No, I was just going to say I couldn't agree more with everything that Jeff just said. And I think for me, my experience working with kind of frontline organizations or individuals, that is largely what has informed, I think for me, the importance of thinking about impact from the beginning of your narrative. Because oftentimes what I have found is that it's conversations and insights from those frontline parties, those stakeholders, who then help shape what the narrative needs to be in order to close a literacy gap that you may not have initially been aware was there. I think a really good example of this is there's a National Geographic film called Sea of Shadows that I had the opportunity to work on, which just in brief is about illegal wildlife trafficking between Mexico and China, leading to the kind of rapid decline of the world's most endangered marine mammal. That's a great example of where if you hadn't had the frontline insights on what actually needed to be the calls to action and what, so it goes back to that working backwards. So what needs to happen? We need to change the situation on the ground. How do we change the situation on the ground? We reduce poaching. How do we reduce poaching? You have to provide alternative livelihoods. How do you get people to support providing alternative livelihoods? They have to have empathy for the people on the ground. If you had gone in without having kind of spent time, I think, with frontline stakeholders and not having worked your way backwards to that, I have to develop empathy for the frontline stakeholders in this situation, it would have been so easy to create this very archetypal story where it was like, good scientists come in to fight bad poachers. And like, it's very easy to accidentally land on that kind of a narrative, but that wouldn't have been in service to the call to action that was actually needed in order to close the gap. We had to have a narrative, a film, which would help you as the viewer build empathy, not only for the people who are struggling to do things legally, but maybe also a little bit for the people who have found their way into being poachers because they're struggling economically and whatnot. I'm not saying you need to sympathize with poaching. I'm just saying that as part of the film, you had to be able to get to a point where you're like, gosh, these people are in an impossible situation, and what actually needs to happen. So there needs to be government intervention. There need to be alternative livelihoods in this area. I would be happy to support a call to action. If we hadn't closed that loop in the narrative, it would have been impossible for me as an impact producer to later say, hey, Mexico, participate in this, we're like rallying and speaking to the Mexican Senate demanding, investment in alternative livelihoods around Baja. That never would have happened and been successful if we hadn't been able to weave that into the narrative. So I think not only is it important to work with frontline stakeholders from what Jeff was saying in terms of longevity, I think it would be a shame to invest so much in a film and a campaign and not have the benefits of that campaign outlive the film and campaign itself. So we're always thinking of that. But it also can, I think, sometimes end up leading you towards a more complex and honest, I think, narrative for your film, which is going to help you tee up those important impact actions later.
I think that there's really an issue of ethics as well. I think we accept now that filmmakers have the ability to shake the dust within any particular topic. And that change doesn't automatically, that change isn't automatically a positive one. We need the extensive partner mapping and doing everything you can to include everybody who may possibly be affected by this, to genuinely understand with an open mind every angle of every argument and to bring in as much knowledge as possible, gives us a framework to work within, where we then will know that at the beginning of the project, with all the information that was possibly available, we have taken what we believed at the time were the best steps to move forwards or to support an issue. It may be that some films will come through, as with any conservation projects in particular, and there were unforeseen outcomes. But from an ethical standpoint, you have to be able to defend that you did what you believed was correct at the right time. And you can't possibly do that without authentically including every stakeholder in every topic and taking the time to understand what the consequences could be as much as possible. And it's one of the things where if people are limited on resources for the kind of launching an impact campaign, understanding and spending real time and having genuine open conversations and not just performatively involving people, really getting their understanding and understanding what would be success for them, and then taking a measured approach to that is the most important stage in my mind.
I think it's interesting you talk about responsibility, because I think that's what we're working through at the moment when we're starting up this academy, is this idea of legacy and real legacy. We had a problem where we were making a series that we knew had done some good, but it would die with the series. Series would be finished, that would be it, it would be over. And that's at the moment that we realized that actually it needed to be something that our company took on, because in that framework, we always had these projects going. There was always chance to do more. There was always new people we could train, but also we're a blue chip wildlife filmmaking company in itself that is people of a certain socioeconomic background, people with a certain education, they've come from a certain place. Now, what we can't do is go to other countries around the world and go, become us, So we've had to work very closely with, the amazing trainees and mentees we've had up until this point, but also organizations like NUF and, around the world who can advise us and help us understand what the challenges have been up until this point, the hurdles have been to creating a fairer way to make TV in our particular part of the industry. So we've quickly established that access to kit was a big issue. So we've partnered with Red, and they're being hugely supportive about setting up legacy campaigns so that we will leave kit in countries and training around that. But also, what does TV making look like in these countries that people there are going to watch? Because we know from an environmental point of view, making blue chip series over and over again hits the same people over and over again on the same channels. Disney may have millions and millions of viewers, but for many viewers in Kenya or in Tanzania, where we're working at the moment, they're watching TV on their phones, and so we need to make sure that we're looking at how we can support people in training in the formats of that. So I think absolutely we need to be rethinking about the way we do things from our perspective, and look at the way that would be most helpful and most powerful and most impactful in those countries, and making sure that we provide training that fits that rather than making them fit our mold. It's not easy, it's not a challenge. We're having to sort of break down everything we do and look at it, but it's what will make lasting change. And if that's what we're in the game of doing, then we have to get that right from the offset.
Love that thinking, Chloe. Yeah.
I appreciate that you've all brought up legacy and the longevity of this work. So I wonder if you could speak to your value system when it comes to when you are building these programs, these campaigns. What does success look like for you, and why is it important that what you're building remains sustainable after the film finishes and after you walk away as creatives? Why is it important to make sure that this is able to sustain and ultimately continue to give back to the spaces that it is supporting?
I think for me, it comes down to how we define impact. I think we're at sort of a both an exciting as well as scary sort of juncture in the evolution of impact within the film industry. I'm really excited by the interest. I think when I first started calling myself an impact producer many years ago, I would introduce myself and people would be like, what is that? And then I'd have to spend a long time sort of explaining what an impact producer was and justifying myself. In fact, James and I met and became friends because I was sort of explaining what I do to James, and James was like, "Nah, that's complete nonsense."
And it was telling Rue that I didn't believe. Actually, the way that I frame it to people to best understand, I don't have a scientific background. My background's production. Is in my mind, impact was the same as going to take your favorite musician and then saying, "Oh, that's a great musician, but you know what they need? More science." That was the framing to me. I thought, no, it's a creative process, and then we started going through. Oh, but what if we can't talk about this topic or that topic? So sorry.
No, it's. I think many people feel that way, and so I think for me, one of the reasons I am so passionate is not only because I really enjoy the work that I do, and I want to see what the efforts that we put in kind of outlive our efforts and have a continuing kind of impact, but I also strongly believe that is the only way for impact to sort of maintain the footprint that it has in the industry. My biggest fear is that we'll end up with people being like, "Oh, I do impact," and what they actually mean is that they do kind of like savvy social media campaigns and they look at vanity metrics. And I mean, I'm just as guilty of that, right? I was talking before about like, oh, we had 15 million visitors to the website, but the truth is that those 15 million visitors only matter because they translated to 6.5 million letters that were sent, which actually had an impact on a government process. And so I think it's all of us have a tendency to sort of, and myself included, to look at those vanity metrics and go, ooh. But my big fear is that impact will become something where we stop there and we say, yep, that's what impact is. And we'll lose the opportunity to develop what I think is kind of a rapidly growing segment in the field. Like Jeff said earlier, it's been around for a while. I by no means can take credit for it. I'm just following in the footsteps of people including Jeff, who have sort of helped lay the groundwork so that folks like myself can eke out a living doing what I do for a living, which is fantastic. But I think that in order to kind of maintain the legitimacy of the work that we do, and I think it really is a craft. I guess that's what I would love for folks to know. It's not just a side thing. There is a science behind it just as much as the person who does your color grade or your editing. There is a craft to impact, and I think when it's done really well, it can do amazing things, both from an authentic impact angle as well as, like James said, from a commercial angle. But that only happens if we follow kind of a rigorous process, and we don't become satisfied by vanity metrics and what looks good but doesn't necessarily deliver. I live in fear of overpromising and under-delivering. Anyway, thanks.
I can jump in a little as well to your question there, Heather, which, if I recall, was around legacy and kind of the long-term, kind of looking at the long-term impact coming through a campaign. I think my headspace on this, coming from the climate lens first, is that we are facing such a crisis that we need to use every and any tool possible to move the needle as fast as we possibly can. And when you look at it from that lens, either you're going to do some short transactional thing that blips and fades and disappears, or you figure out how to do meaningful, lasting change that can change a generation, change a value set, change a worldview, that can actually pave a better path for a better future. I think we desperately need that, right? And I think that from my headspace around, why invest in kind of those long-term investments, it's because that's really the only path forward for sort of turning the ship at all on our climate crisis. And I think that lens then extends over to other issues as well, whether we're talking about short-term wins or long-term gains, and how do we actually solve for big problems, big societal challenges that we face, and how do we make a difference that's going to be a lasting thing for generations to come, hopefully. I think that's the headspace for me and for our team, is thinking really down the line, thinking about the future, about future generations, and what do we need to do to fix those conditions now that aren't working for the vast majority of people on the planet.
Yeah, I guess success for us would look like us not shipping the same people around the world to tell the stories of the country that we're shipping them to, with all the kit and all the carbon and all the and letting people from their own countries tell their own stories about their own environment, their own wildlife, the pressing issues that are facing there. And in doing so, I will do myself out of a job, because the UK's mostly got ducks and a few squirrels and not exciting wildlife stories to tell. But I guess that's, personally for us, it becomes more and more uncomfortable each year that the bigger the budgets around these super blue chip landmark series that are made about our world, and yet it's the same people going around telling them. And I think it speaks for us a voice, and I think ultimately legacy for us will be, we say, and our kind of tagline, and I'm pretty sure we've stolen it from someone else, is that if you want to change the story, you first got to change the voice. And that's what we so desperately need in our industry, and I think probably a lot of industries around the world, but especially the creative industry. So ours is just a small step to do that. But I think it all feeds into the same problem with issues that our planet's facing, is that we can get more traction on local stories that matter to people, what people are going through, what people are struggling with, what they want to get seen, elevate those platforms, elevate those voices, elevate those stories. And we won't do that by shipping from someone from Bristol who's great at camera work to every country around the world. So it has to happen for us.
We're at a really exciting time now where impact's having its moment, and I think production companies are seeing the benefits of moving in that direction. What we're hoping that we can do at Project Impact, and I know a lot of other people in the space trying to do the same, is to take this moment to have the discussions about what is genuine impact, so that we don't end up, I mean, my biggest fear is the same as Rue's. It's people claiming big impact wins because they found a clever way to frame something that wasn't necessarily their achievement, or that wasn't actually, and I think the baseline that we need to start measuring impact of is not zero. You can't just have a production which speaks to 50 million people and then say, oh, we did a couple of small things. You need to say, what was the potential of a production that spoke to 50 million people? Did we achieve the maximum potential? How close to it did we get? To recognize the ability and the voice that we have. And when I talk a lot about the kind of commercial aspects of it, it means that if we can get to that model where every production company can comfortably fund an impact campaign, then we have a prosperous industry that is based off productions being something in the toolkit, in the conservation and the humanitarian toolkit, that is a sustainable industry that has legacy to build and will go on for years off the basis of this is content that is making a genuine change in the world. For that to be the KPI for creating content out of Bristol, and I say Bristol, I shouldn't be saying just Bristol, but to be creating content, that is, for me, that's the dream. It's for people to stop saying we created content and this many people saw it. It's we created content and it made this shift, it made this change, it supported this effort. And to see business models shifting towards that, in particularly factual, but now moving towards fiction as well. Generally, we're seeing some people moving in that direction, is very, very reassuring for me, because I do believe that we've got the power and responsibility to do pretty big things in this space as an industry.
One of the things that I would love for this conversation to ignite at the Hollywood Climate Summit is for fiction filmmakers and television writers to think about impact and your models in their processes as well. What is the potential in that space to reimagine impact throughout the entire process, and what can ultimately come from that?
I think narrative filmmakers have such a huge opportunity, and also one that, as we've been speaking to over this conversation, opportunity, but also responsibility. I think narrative filmmakers, like, find a scientist that does work on what you're writing about. Like, scientists are so eager to share and like give you insights. They'll give you great insights into like what you can incorporate into a script or into your film, and you can make it accurate and intriguing and exciting. But it pains me so much when there's a narrative film that just like gets the science wrong, because you are literally just teaching humans at scale something that's inaccurate, and nobody's going to fact check your narrative movie, but it's going to like embed this thought in the back of their mind of, oh yeah, I heard that such and such happens, and like, no, that's not. Like, I think narrative filmmakers, because narrative films get seen generally more widely than nonfiction film, I think there's such a huge ability to shift culture through narrative films that I think that needs to be held very sacredly as a responsibility. And what ideas are you putting out into the world, and what will be the consequences of the ideas that you put out into the world? So I personally see that as very exciting, as a huge opportunity, and not to be a daunting or nerve-wracking frame for anybody, hopefully. But I think there's such a huge space for narrative shift culture in such a powerful way, and I think we have to wield that carefully.
Yeah, I'll just expand on, I'm sorry, James. I'll expand on what Jeff said. I was just going to, you mentioned cultural shifts. This is actually some of the research that got me interested in impact. I got interested in impact because I was writing a National Science Foundation grant. And as such, I started digging into lots of facts and whatnot about kind of how people learn and how culture is shifted. And Jeff's absolutely right. Mainstream media and narrative films in particular play a huge role in sort of setting expectations for what is a cultural norm within groups of people, and when we see things represented by even just in passing, actually I should say especially just in passing, by characters in narrative films, when you have cultural norms, and whether that has to do with views on climate change or biodiversity or social justice, or any number of issues, when those have even subtle framing, and like I said, even sometimes more, it's almost more valuable sometimes when it's in passing. passing because it communicates to the viewer that this is a kind of ubiquitously accepted cultural norm. You do so much good work in sort of resetting for folks. I'm sure that lots of people have heard before that statistic about kind of when, you know, I forget exactly what it is, but, you know, what percentage of the population, we are herd animals by nature. And once we start to get the idea that the majority of people around us have shifted their beliefs, we have seen time and time again with numerous cultural and social issues over the past decades that people will flip their thinking very, very quickly to kind of fall in line, you know, with the herd, frankly. And narrative films have such an enormous opportunity to help represent that. And I think, like Jeff said something before, which I think is incredibly important and a big part of how we think about projects. We simply don't have time with some of the crises that are facing the planet at the moment to not do everything that is in our power. And I do not think when I say everything that's in our power, it doesn't mean yelling louder. It doesn't mean protesting harder. It doesn't mean those things are all valuable and important. By no means am I dismissing them, but they can't be the only pathway because they only speak to a certain segment of the population. Narrative films have the opportunity to reach billions of people worldwide, and you can literally set the trajectory of what people think as kind of normal as for our culture. And why not take that opportunity to we genuinely just don't have time. And I think, you know, like Jeff said, a conversation with a scientist or an impact producer or someone, it doesn't have to be an invasive process. Just having somebody who can have a seat at the table and contribute to that can do enormous work for relatively little effort.
Jeff was saying earlier about focusing more on the solutions, and I think the fiction space is one where we can actually show people what that looks like, and we can start establishing a narrative around climate and environmental issues, around hope. We know it's one of the biggest motivators, and there's a huge amount of research out there about how to leverage that and how to build empathy amongst users against viewers. I say users because we've been using so much tech recently. But I'd love to see the fiction space building out that opportunity, and I do think there is an opportunity. We know there's a receptive audience that has got huge concerns that are yet to be addressed, and the fiction space offers a huge amount of opportunity to demonstrate what the future could look like and how we could get there. So, which is super exciting to me.
I guess as well, for us, there's not such a big difference between drama and wildlife filmmaking. It's sort of the same. It's the same issues, the same problems, the same challenges. You bring more voices to the table, you've got better stories to tell, you've got richer, more engaging, more varied stories to tell. It's pretty simple. Make more opportunities, make more space. And then I guess the practicality of doing that, just do it. I mean, we didn't quite know how. We had a sort of, how can we bring new people onto the team from different countries? How will it work? And they haven't got the same training, and they don't know about blue chip filmmaking, and they don't. And we were all very worried about it. And then it was hugely humbling when it just worked, and they were brilliant, and everyone brought value and helped the production, both financially, the depth of the storytelling, the access we got. Just do it. I think I know ours is a very small part of the world of impact, but in 2 years, we've learned the huge value of just opening the doors, working with other people, letting those opportunities in. And it's been humbling, inspiring, hugely beneficial. So yeah, do it.
Thank you all so much for your work. And I appreciate you framing it, Rue, as impact as an open dialogue, and one that shouldn't be systematic, but one that we revisit and we continue to explore. And I applaud all of you for doing that in various ways. And thank you so much for sharing them with us today. I think we will take a lot of value from this conversation. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Are there any final thoughts that anyone would like to add?
Just thank you.
Yeah, it's been so interesting and inspiring.
Thank you.
Guys' work. Yeah, brilliant.